In this video, we will show you how to replace your front lower ball joint on this Chevy Silverado. This is part of your front suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to do is safely raise and support the vehicle so the front wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, continue on to removing your center cover using a 22mm socket, and then we'll remove all 6 of our 22mm lug nuts located behind it. Get the wheel off of here. Now that we have the wheel off, we're going to start removing the caliper from the area. If you were to look along the backside, you're going to find that you have 2 18mm headed bolts to remove. Use an 18mm to remove these bolts. Once you remove the mounting bolts, give it a quick inspection. If it looks like it's rotted and damaged, you have to go ahead and replace these. We'll start that one in just a couple threads here and fully remove the other one. Slide this off of here. A quick inspection of your brake pads, of course. If it looks like they're worn or damaged in any way, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace the brakes. We'll set this aside, putting no pressure on the flex hose temporarily. Let's remove the brake rotor. We'll give this a quick inspection. Once again, if it looks like it's rotted, go ahead and replace the front brakes. With the rotor out of the way, the next thing that we need to do is pay attention to our ABS wire. This ABS wire comes from the wheel bearing all the way up across the upper control arm, across the frame, and it mounts in up along the top here where you're going to find a wire connector. To dislodge this connector, go ahead and take hold of that locking tab, lift it up just a little bit, and disconnect the connector. A quick inspection for corrosion. We'll set one side aside and continue on with disconnecting the rest of that ABS wiring harness. Right there's the little locking tab. You can just lift up on that. You could use your fingers or a small prying device. You can even use a small pocket screwdriver if you need it. If you see any funny colors in this area, that would be corrosion and it needs to be dealt with. This one looks fine. Let's start dislodging that ABS wire. You can use a trim tool or a small prying device for this. Just make your way underneath it and lift it up and out of place. As we make our way along this area, you can find that you can use a small screwdriver to dislodge each one of these clips without actually removing them from the frame. This one in here. Make its way underneath this caliper. To dislodge it from this area, you'd want to squeeze on these 2 ears right along this area and pull it out of place towards the front of the vehicle. You can use some long nose pliers for this. A quick inspection of that ABS wire, and now we're going to tie it up around the wheel bearing here. We don't want it to get damaged while we continue this process. With that ABS wire out of the way, let's continue on to our brake flex hose mounting bracket. You'll find that this is held in place with one 8mm headed bolt. A quick inspection of that bolt and we'll set it aside. Take hold of the bracket, give it a wiggle and lift it up and out of place. At this point, you want to be extremely careful that the caliper does not fall off one direction or the other. You can use a strap and tie it up in place. We'll just hang it aside, putting no pressure on the flex hose. I've got a hook on this area. We'll just bring this down. Like I said, we're paying attention to the flex hose, causing no damage here. Let's continue on to removing the outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle here. To remove this, you'll find that you have a locking cotter pin. Go ahead and remove that and dispose of it properly. Continue on with an 18mm. The next thing you'll have to do is separate the outer tie rod end from your steering knuckle. If you're not replacing the outer tie rod end, you want to be extremely careful not to damage it in any way. You could damage the boot or even the studded area. Now, to separate this, you could use a hammer and just cause some light vibration here, and that should break it free. A quick inspection of that outer tie rod end, make sure it's not damaged. If it is, like I said, you have to go ahead and replace it. This looks fine, we'll set it aside. Move along to your lower ball joint mounting nut. Use a 24mm for this. A quick inspection of that mounting nut. We'll start it back on there, just a couple threads. Make your way to the upper ball joint mounting nut. Remove this with a swivel 18mm. At this point, we can continue on causing a little bit more vibration. We need to separate the knuckle from the upper and the lower ball joints. I'm going to start tapping up along where the upper ball joint makes its way through the knuckle here. We're being careful not to cause any damage to that ball joint while doing so. You can use some penetrant if needed. Now that I have the upper ball joint dislodged, we're going to continue tapping, but this time it's going to be lower on the knuckle. There we are. Let's get this off of here. With the knuckle out of the way, the next thing that we're going to do is pay attention to that upper ball joint. We need to confirm that we caused no damage and the boot is still in good working order. Now that we have the knuckle out of the way, we have a clear view of the lower ball joint. The ball joint itself is held to the lower control arm with 4 rivets. To remove these rivets, you're going to use a small cutting wheel. Cut off the heads of the rivets and then drive the rest of it out of the control arm. After that, you can remove the ball joint. Now I've got my air chisel. If you find you have a hard time driving out the rivets, you may have to cut off the head along the top and the bottom and make sure it's inverted enough that the ball joint and the stud will fit out through the control arm. Once you get to the point that you've removed as much of the rivets as possible, we'll continue on with trying to remove the ball joint from the control arm. First, I'll just remove the boot. We'll set that aside. Continue on to carefully prying this out of place. Once you have the hardware removed, we'll continue on to removing the ball joint from the control arm. You might just have to pry this out of place. There it is, friend. Now that we have the ball joint out of there, let's go ahead and clean and inspect the control arm. Make sure it's still in good reusable condition. Okay, it's time to install our brand new lower ball joint. We'll take this ball joint and slide it in position, aligning each one of our mounting holes. Once you have that slid in position, continue on with all 4 of your brand new mounting bolts. Make sure you have a washer on each one of those bolts before you slide it through. Apply a thin amount of thread locker to the threads. Continue on with a washer and a nut for each one of these. We'll continue on with an 18 and a 19 millimeter to tighten up the mounting hardware here. Got a 19 millimeter for the mounting nuts down along the bottom. 18 millimeter for the top. Okay, they're snug. Go ahead and torque those to 60 foot-pounds. Let's reinstall the steering knuckle here. Align the lower ball joint with the lower mounting port. Continue on with your lower ball joint mounting nut. We'll start this on by hand. Now that we have the lower mounting nut started, let's continue on with a pry bar. We're going to go across the top of the upper control arm and underneath the coil spring area. You should be able to pivot this now with a little bit of leverage. Now let's take the steering knuckle and swing it into position. Align it with that upper ball joint stud, pull down on the control arm to put this in position. With both of those started on, let's make our way back down to the lower ball joint nut. We'll be using our 24 millimeter, snug this up, and torque it to 74 foot-pounds. Now, once you have this torqued, the next thing that you will want to do if you have a Castle nut on your ball joint is continue on by putting in your locking cotter pin. If the slot is not aligned with the hole on your ball joint, continue tightening until the very next slot is, and then put in your locking cotter pin. Make sure you pin it over. Make your way to your upper ball joint mounting nut. Let's bottom this out and torque it to 37 foot-pounds. If you find you're having a hard time tightening this because the ball joint stud spins, continue applying pressure along the top of the control arm, holding it down into the knuckle while you continue. Now it's time for the outer tie rod end. Go ahead and take this and put it in position. Once you have that slid in there, we'll continue on with our nut. Start this on by hand, snug it up, and then you want to torque that to 48 foot-pounds. Once you have this torqued, the next thing that you need to do is pay attention to the slots on the mounting nut in comparison to the hole that goes through the stud. Align it. If for some reason it's not aligned, continue tightening the nut until it is, and then put in your locking cotter pin. Now it's time to re-secure our flex hose. We're going to take the caliper and put it back in position over here. We'll make sure it doesn't fall down while we continue. If you were to look along the top of the steering knuckle, you're going to find two ports. I used some copper anti-seize directly inside of each one of these ports. The forward one is the one for your mounting bolt, the other one's for the locating tab on your flex hose bracket. Let's take this and put it in position, aligning that tab with the hole, and then start in the mounting bolt and snug it up. Double check, make sure it's nice and secure. Now we can secure this to the bracket here. Let's clip this on. You want to press it in, listen for a click from that. Let's continue with the ABS wire. We'll take this and bring it behind the flex hose here. Now we can connect this into its corresponding bracket. Just press it in, listen for a click from that. Let's continue on down the line. Slide this on there. Press it in, listen for a click from that. We'll make our way up here. The next thing we'll do is continue on with connecting in our two wires, and then we'll slide that wire connector down into its locked position. Press that in, listen for a click, give it a little tug. Double check to make sure it's secure. Time to install the grease fitting along the top of the ball joint here. Just start it in by hand and snug it up. Let's throw some grease in there. Moving along, we're going to clean the mating surface of our wheel bearing and the backside of the rotor. You can use a wire brush and some parts cleaner for this. A little splash of anti-seize. Install your brake rotor. We'll continue on to that caliper. Go ahead and take that and put it in position. Once you have it in position, continue on with your two mounting bolts. Slide this right on over that. We've got our two mounting bolts. Clean the threads. Of course, I'm going to use some thread locker on these. With each one of these two bolts snug, continue on to torquing these to 129 foot-pounds. One last quick inspection in the area and we'll continue on with our wheel. Start on all 6 of your 22mm lug nuts. We'll bottom these out, get the wheel safely back on the ground, and then we can torque each of these to 140 foot-pounds. With the wheel on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you have a center cover, install that now. To install your center cover, you'll notice that you have 6 caps that need to screw onto each one of the lug nuts. Go ahead and align it and install these by hand. You don't want to strip them out. Okay friends, we've got the vehicle back together. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. After that, go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.